Hi everybody, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here, and today I am looking at this beast underneath these pedals. This is a KHE Amp Switcher. Now you would think, okay, that switches between amps. Whoop-de-doo, what's so special about that? Well, today I'm going to tell you, because this thing quite frankly does a lot more than I thought it did, and I'm going to be basing a lot of my studio setup around this, so stay tuned. Alright, right now this isn't actually plugged into an amp yet, but I have big plans and I will talk about them in just a minute. What I do have is this slightly kind of rough looking pedal board, and the reason I've got this here is just to kind of show you how this thing works and why it's so clever and why I've wanted one for so long. I've never got around to it until now, but now I am doing it. This is the first step in what's going to be a more complicated setup that makes life very easy for me in the studio. This is the KHE 4x4 FX switcher, and as you can see from this shot of the back, there is a lot going on. There are more holes than Swiss cheese. This thing can do some seriously clever things. Now, this is called the 4x4 because this can connect 4 amps, 4 cabinet outputs, and 4 effects loops. That's where the effects comes from. And what I've got here is a bit of an example before I wire it all in. And so I've got my guitar going to the key input of my DAE Golem gate, but that is just a pass-through that's just a detector, and that's going through to the Antares overdrive. And that then goes through to the guitar input on the switcher. From there, that goes out to whatever guitar amp head I have selected at guitar level. So whether that be what we've got over here, we've got the Mesa Boogie Mark IV, the Peavey 5150, I've currently got a Wangs amp and a Mesa preamp and rack mount system. But I've got others I am going to be wiring in. And again, I'll talk about that in a bit. Whenever the sound has gone through that amp, it then goes through the effects loop of those amps and then comes into the effects section here, which is switchable per amp. So it may be that I want the effects loop, or maybe I don't, depending on how I'm switching and why, because the why is very personal. And so what I have in the effects loop here is the actual gate section of this Golem gate, and then it's going into a Boss DD7 delay. So if I want delay on a solo, I can just click that on. You can use whatever pedals you like, but that's one that I have that's an Old Faithful. It just kind of works. And that goes back into the effects section on here, and then that goes back to the effects loop of that amp. There are 4 sets of effects loop holes to go with the 4 amps. If you've got an amp that doesn't have an effects loop, that's fine. You don't have to have that enabled. You don't have to have one of the switching systems with effects loops in at all. I, doing a lot of heavy guitar work, like to have a noise gate, which for me works best in the effects loop, and most of the amps that I use have an effects loop because a lot of heavy amps are designed that way. Like I say, you don't have to do that, but if that's what you want, great. There's also a tuner output on the switcher, which at the moment I've got the Polytune plugged in through there, and so you can do that. And if you don't want to have a pedal, you can have a rack tuner or something like that. That way you've always got a tuner plugged in that the guitarist can always use. That's quite a useful feature for me. I have a rack tuner in my usual live performing rack, but I'll probably buy a second one to go in with this switcher, because then whatever guitarist I have in here, it's another thing where we don't have to go, oh no, I forgot the tuner. It's there. So this is a little rough, like I said right now, but the plan for me is to put Velcro on the back of these, have this pedal board on the rack over there for the guitarist to plug into. There is also a guitar input on the back of the switcher for neatness and convenience. I think they relay switch between them. Talking of relay switches, this is where this unit gets very clever. Right now, we'll look at cabinets before we look at amps. The cabinets, there are 4 on here, and you might be able to see one is lit up really brightly and one is lit up kind of dimly. On number 1, I've got a really long cable that goes under the floor to my live room that is currently connected to one of the Zilla Cabs. I keep looking at that camera. Duh. And this one is actually connected to this 2 Notes Captor 8. The other 2 don't light up at all because there is nothing connected to them, and if I try and switch them on the front of the unit here, nothing happens. That's a really good safety feature, that if one of the cabinets isn't connected, you're not suddenly leaving an open circuit with the amp, because most valve amps, if you leave them open circuit, so not connected to a cab, they will go flash, fizz, bang, lots of smoke, very bad times. There are a few exceptions to that, but as a general rule, with a valve amp, you can't have them not connected. With that said, once you've selected your amp, and listen to the stunk on that. That's a lot of relay switching in there. And that's the effects loop switching, that's the amp loop switching, and there's one relay, I believe, maybe a couple, on the cabinets, so that everything very chunky, very solid, has lots and lots of cable inside there, so that if you've got high-powered amp, it's not going to go bang. And so this is a really useful tool. This can also be controlled remotely, which works perfectly for me, because I'm going to have this on the far side of my control room. Because of convenience, because of reasons I'll come to in a minute. There is also the S-line section, which means that you can connect this to more KHE switchers, which is what I'm probably going to do in the future. Because 4 amps, 4 cabs, and 4 effects loops is great. I'm planning on having more amps in here. I'm not planning on having more cabinets, and that's where their semi-modular range really comes in handy for me. But for what I'm doing, this is a really good starting unit and doesn't need to be replaced because of the modular nature. It can be controlled by MIDI, which means that if I've got a really long MIDI cable, which I do, then I can have this connected to either the streaming PC or the studio PC, and that means I can have it controlled by my Stream Deck, which is great, because that means that I can have the same little unit here that I use to control what cameras are being used when we stream, that I can use the exact same buttons to control which amp and which cab I'm using without having to reach over to MIDI functionality on anything else. Having said that, if you've got anything that can control MIDI, like I've got the Matthews Effects Futurist, the tiny little pedal that I've reviewed before, or if you've got something like, I don't know, a Line 6 HX Stomp, those things can send out MIDI commands as well. You could have something like that as your effects unit that then remotely, live, changes a switcher. So you could take 2 or 3 amps out and two or three cabs on tour. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to do that these days, but if you want to do that, this is a really easy and convenient way to do it. And so you can then switch from a single control unit, which makes it really easy. There's also control input and output so that they connect the multiple switches together so they can then talk to each other, decide which one is number 1, number 2, all that kind of stuff. So then you can send out signals and it will do the right thing, and they will all talk to each other and no wires will be crossed, so to speak. Now, let's talk about how I'm going to have this in my system, because it is a little bit of a kind of, it will seem overkill and it will seem a little bit silly at first. In this corner, ding ding ding, I have a rack that is a big tower of tone. And right now there aren't many amps on there because I keep taking them home to Studio B and taking them out, having them repaired, modded, all that kind of stuff. But that will be full. And over here, which you can just about not see off camera, but I'll just get a different angle shot. You'll have seen it in other videos. I have a second rack of amps, which currently has the Mark IV, the 5150, the OD30, and the Mesa 5050. And what I'm going to do for this switcher is I'm going to have those 4 amps which are on the far side, but depending on the camera angle, are on camera connected up to this switcher, which is going to be in that corner, which means that it's going to be a lot of long cables, a lot of what seems extra, what seems silly, but the intention in the long run is to have another one of their 8-channel amp switchers next to it with another 8 connections in that rack, so that I can have bass amps, more guitar amps, a solid state amp that I'll be using for reamping quite a lot, and an extra set of connections that can come out to here. So if I do an amp review, all I have to do is plug in the cables that have extended, put that here, and the rest of it will already be pre-wired. That's going to make my life really easy. And then I'm going to have an 8-channel effects loop switcher on top for those extra 8 amps. I might not do that, I'll see. But I definitely need another 8 amps set up here. And we'll see which ones need effects loops, which ones don't, and I will eventually work out numberings. But for now, this is 4 channels over there, and it also means it's going to be easy for me to put things like the load boxes and the speaker cables that just about reach in that corner there. And that's going to be the start of something beautiful. So, let's go. All right, 3 hours later, I am back and I am here with my lovely LT Custom T-shaped guitar going into this setup over here. And so that is all wired in. I need to tie them together at the back, a couple of bits, neaten them up. But I'll talk you through the signal chain. And there are 4 amps here. I'm currently going through the top one and making sounds. Now, you're only hearing that through this microphone here, and that's simply because I'm just doing this as a tech demo to make sure everything works, and I'm going to be doing proper miking with everything at some point in the very near future. But that's going to be in a video with other stuff I'll talk about shortly. So I'm going from this guitar into the key input of that Deadweald Audio Golem gate, which is a very, very solid tight gate, which is why I've got the volume up all the way here, nothing's happening, and then I go. And that happens, that makes noise. That is then going through to the 2 boosts that are on the other pedal board, which is a Marcus Deluxe Vert board. One's the limo version, one's the standard version. I'm not being paid to say that, I just like them. And right now I've got the Peppers Pedals Dirty Tree engaged, which is a screamer of a boost. I've also got the Tate Effects Antares Overdrive there, so I can switch between them. And I can rather quickly switch that out for a different boost if I so choose. So the audio goes from the boost using that red cable at the front into the guitar input on the front. I might switch that to the one in the back just for neatness, but I have the option to do either. That's then going into currently this top amp, which is actually a Mesa V-Twin preamp and a Mesa 5050 power amp, acting as kind of a dual rectifier style amp. I've got the Road King at home, but it's big and heavy and it's perfectly happy where it is. Then I've got the Peavey 5150 Mark I, the Wangs HD50, and the Wharfdale TCT50, which is kind of like a steroids Marshall type thing. So I've got some pretty good things covered here. And then that goes back from there, power-wise, back to the KHE, which then goes out to my choice of cab. Right now that's a Zilla 10-inch, 1x10, and it sounds like this. Sounds massive, surprisingly massive. Now, I'm currently on the dual rec type amp. I'm going to go over and switch the cab. I'm now actually plugged into a Hartke bass cab, and this is going to sound terrible. Sounds a bit like kind of Swedish chainsaw death metal there. But the fact that I've got a bass cab plugged in means that in the future I'll put a different bass cab in that spot, and that'll be nice and easy for me to then have guitar and bass setups through the same switcher and just go click click. and change that round. Last but not least, I'm now plugged into the 2 Notes Captor 8, which is at the top right of the frame there. And so when I do this, it makes a little bit of a whirring noise, but that's about it. And then that signal will go straight in through an XLR phantom powered through to the system. Now that's useful for me sometimes if, let's say I've got a band where the rest of the band are in the live room and we don't want to blast them with guitar noise. I'm not now having to hunt around the back to change it all around. I can just click a button and go. Or if it's 4 AM and I'm suddenly inspired and I come down here and record, but everybody else in the building doesn't want that kind of noise at 4 AM, I can do that too. And so I can switch any of these amps and switch in and out their effects loops as well. Next thing to talk about is I'm having to actually get up and move and switch all this from the other side of the room, which is a real pain, but it can all be controlled by MIDI. That's the thing I'm gonna do in the next video, is I'm going to get myself a nice long MIDI cable and find either a MIDI output on the streaming system or on the mix system. I've not decided which is most practical yet. And I'm gonna do that so that I can have everything ready to go on this little Stream Deck. That way I can just press some buttons, change the things remotely. Happy days. But I am going to talk about that in another video because not only do I not have a MIDI cable with me, but it's quite technical and I'm going to show you how to set that up. I'm sure once we get over the initial hurdle of finding out which MIDI messages we need to send, it should be relatively simple. But like I say, we'll get technical another time. The other thing to talk about is price. It costs a fair amount of money to do this. This isn't going to be for everybody. It's a lot of money for what is in some ways a glorified cable. But for me, this is going to save me hours, days of time, because now I'll be able to have a guitarist with 4 different amp tones that they like, and I'll be able to go, how about this one? No. How about this one? No. How about this one? Yes. Or if I'm tracking an album and they've got kind of a core tone, but they've got 2 or 3 different alternate tones that they want to put on top, then we can do that too. And that's all ready to go. Easy, click, click, off we go. That is what I want to see. And that means that I can save loads of time if I've got the guitarist in the zone, on the sofa, listening through the monitors, and we go, right, that's the main rhythm done. Here's an octave part, click. Here's the amp we're using for the lead tone, click. We're not going to use that cabinet for the lead tone. Let's use cabinet 2 with the microphones already positioned, click. That kind of click, 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 click kind of thing is really going to save me so much time. And even when I'm reamping, that's going to save massive amounts of time. When I get things like, I'll get the Dynamount, which is the remote controlled mic arm, on one of the cabinets, and I'll be able to then switch between amps, change position of one of the microphones to go with that, all remotely without moving, and just change. Now, if you're doing this at home, I can see why this would be a bit much. If you're running a professional studio, I know how much it costs in this country at least, if not loads more, to hire assistants. And as much as I want to have assistants that help and all that kind of thing, I know that was a fixed cost and that is now done. Including the cables, I think that cost me about £1,200 for this. But that was partly because the cables stretch all the way across here. That was partly because I got the one with the effects in it. That was partly because I got all these features where they do like a little 4 amp in, 2 cabinet out model, which is much more affordable, and you can run much shorter cables if you're just running this stuff in one little rack, and you can expand it all the way up to crazy talk. So that means that the possibilities are endless. And what I'm planning to do, like I said earlier, is have the 8 amp input and the 8 effects loop, so that I can have another 8 amps in the rack that's over where the pedals are, but stacking up, including a solid state amp for reamping, bass amps, different setups, so that I can just, as I collect amps, I can just add them in and go. And that means that expandability is going to make life so much easier for me than just having to rewire every time, which honestly was bad for my back as well. Thanks everybody for watching. Hope you really enjoyed this. I have got loads of use out of this already on day one, and I'm sure I'll get loads more use out of it as I expand the system. And you will see it again, like I said, with the MIDI video. So thanks to KHE and Kieran from KHE for helping me sort this out. Thanks everybody for watching. Hit the like button, share, subscribe, tell all your friends. Oh dude, you should totally get an amp switcher. Oh, they're also cheaper than the competition. There you go. So yeah, I'm not being paid for this video. The switcher that I've got is on loan, and I need to work something out about that, but we'll see about that. But like I said, I'm not being paid for this. So thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next video. See you later. Hey everyone, that might be the end of the video, but if you fancy carrying on this conversation, we have a Discord server. Link is in the description. We're also on Patreon, which is something you can really help us with. We also are on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Hot Pole Studios. See you there.